Great, we're recording now.
Awesome.
Well, we're at the top of the hour and we've got a quorum. So maybe we just sort of start the intro slides and people will join if they join.
That sounds good.
Awesome. Welcome everybody to our second webinar, our third event here at the Water Justice Knowledge Exchange. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for coming. I just want to start out with a quick thank you to our lovely sponsors, the Graduate Professional Student Council, and Humanitarian Assistance Technical Support for supporting this series of knowledge exchanges. As we must, every time we begin, we respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the Asam and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through educational offerings, partnerships, and community service. My name is Lucas Polari. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Geography, and I'm really excited to be here today. My work focuses particularly on flood justice and flood vulnerability in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. Gift cannot be here with us today. She's doing field work also in the borderlands on water quality and public health, but she certainly sends her regards. She's a third-year PhD candidate in environmental science. Hannah?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Friedrich. I'm a third-year PhD student in School of Geography, Development, Environment with Lucas. And yeah, my research is focused on looking at long-term recovery trends and the role that different financial resources like property insurance and federal aid plays in aiding or hindering recovery. And yeah, I'm calling in from Lake Charles, Louisiana.
So now that we've introduced ourselves, we really want this to be a very interactive space. We encourage participation and engagement. So if you could, please introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us your name, affiliation, some of your interests, and why you registered for this session. As I said previously, the whole point of these series is really about knowledge exchange, but sharing information bilaterally and sort of breaking down some of these hierarchies that we see in academia. So please, if folks could share in the chat, we'd really appreciate it, so we can sort of create a little community for the next hour and a half or so.
Yeah, and it's also great to see so many new names that I don't know from the attendees and participants. So I'm really glad that you've joined. And if you want to mention like where you learned about joining the webinar too, in like your little intro, if you want to share something, that will be helpful for us to also learn about how you learned about this event, so we can continue marketing in that direction for future events. Yeah, so just a quick background on kind of the origins of what the Water Justice Knowledge Exchange is. It kind of came out of this long conversation that started over a year ago between Lucas and myself about thinking about what are platforms that we can utilize to learn how to be researchers that work with community-based organizations in a way that there is an equal playing field in terms of both the researcher and a community-based partner coming together to form project ideas and working towards solutions through that project and beyond. And we thought that there was really a lack of both training and resources and just like kind of like coffee table chat or conversation about how to do that, in terms of building relationships, what it means to maintain those relationships over a long period. And I think for both Lucas and myself, being junior scholars and students who are kind of just getting off the ground with trying to figure out how to do these types of things, hearing from others who have been in this space before and have collaborated with community-based partners, learning about their experiences and, kind of the lessons learned, what are the, in the weeds kind of tactics that people rely on to have really effective and co-beneficial relationships that can achieve shared project goals. And we've kind of coalesced around the topic of water justice and social justice, just given our overlapping interest in thinking about flooding and flood justice and how disasters can exacerbate existing social vulnerabilities. So as Lucas mentioned in the beginning, this is just our first semester that we've been doing activities like this. And we will have a couple of webinars coming out also in the spring semester. So stay tuned. We're in the process of narrowing down who those speakers will be, but we're hoping to also have some more international scholars showcased. We'll be sharing out that information as it comes together. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We have Shelby Thompson from the Pima County Food Alliance and Dr. Gigi Owen from the Climate Assessment for the Southwest. And the title of their talk is Cultivating Equitable Food Policy in Southern Arizona. So Shelby and Gigi, thank you, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm going to give Gigi a moment to just get our slides up on the screen, and then we will start our presentation. All right, looks good. Well, thank you both so much for the introduction and for having us here today. We're really happy to be here with you all, sharing about cultivating equitable food policy in Southern Arizona. This is a project that we've been collaborating on for over a year, and this is really the first time that we're getting to share the whole recap of the project up until this point. So thank you for being our audience for the first time, and maybe give us a little grace because this is the first time that we're doing it together. So as Hannah mentioned, my name is Shelby Thompson, and I am joined by my colleague, Dr. Gigi Owen. We'll give longer introductions in a moment here. And I just want to mention that this project couldn't have happened without the incredible team that we work with. I see a few of them on the call here today, but there are many of us, as well as the Arizona Food Systems Network, Climate Assessment for the Southwest, and the Center for Regional Food Studies. Next slide, please. Perfect. So we're fortunate to have a good amount of time today to talk in depth about our project and have time for some Q&A throughout and at the end of the presentation. We'll start by giving you an overview of the Pima County Food Alliance and the U of A Food Systems Research Lab, which are the two main organizations that have come together to collaborate on this project. And then we'll share more about the ins and outs of our projects, including challenges and successes that we've encountered along the way. So who are we and who are the organizations that we represent? As I mentioned earlier, my name is Shelby Thompson. I use she, her pronouns. I have been a member of the Pima County Food Alliance Leadership Council since 2018. So that's how I really got involved in this project. Currently, I work for Pinnacle Prevention, which is an Arizona-based nonprofit that is dedicated to cultivating a just food system and opportunities for joyful movement across the state of Arizona. As the Arizona Food Systems Network Coalition Coordinator, I get to help convene food systems coalitions, advocates, and practitioners across the state so that we can work together to create a thriving food system for everyone in Arizona. And I will let Gigi introduce herself.
Thanks, Shelby. So I'm Gigi Owen. I'm a research scientist with the Climate Assessment for the Southwest, or CLIMAS program. We are an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research program funded by NOAA, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And it's through one of their programs in the Climate Program Office called the Climate Adaptation Partnerships Program. My background is in human geography, political ecology, and science and technology studies. I earned my doctorate here at the University of Arizona in the School of Geography, Development, and the Environment in 2019. And so my current research really focuses on kind of adaptation to environmental and climatic challenges here in the Southwest, and then really picking apart the ways that research can help support those adaptation efforts. So to that end, I do a lot of evaluation of research impacts to better understand how we as researchers can use our skills to help make tangible changes in society. I also co-founded the Food Systems Research Lab with Dr. Laurel Belante, which supports researchers and graduate students through funding and opportunities to work on local food systems issues, which we'll talk more about the lab in a few minutes.
Thanks, Gigi. We use the term food system and food policy council a lot through this presentation, and so I just want to share definitions for those terms to help develop a shared understanding for the purposes of our presentation today. So by our definitions, a food system is everything and everybody that influences food production, processing, distribution, and consumption. You can see on the screen here the different elements of Arizona's food system, and these are all components of our local food system here that we have been assessing over the last year or so. Of course, the system also incorporates economics, politics, local environments, health, and other social factors, all of which we need to be aware of to really assess the full food system. The Pima County Food Alliance, which I'm here today representing, is Pima County's Food Policy Council. Food policy councils are generally networks that are made up of people working across the food system, including people such as farm workers, policymakers, community members, and others who have a vested interest in making change in our local food policy in our local food system. Each food policy council is unique and has different ways of responding to the needs of its community. The members of a food policy council typically work together to address food system related issues and needs through a combination of policy, advocacy, community building, education, and outreach. And food policy councils really vary a lot in terms of how they're funded, structured, and related to a government body. Some food policy councils are part of the city or county government and receive funding from that government body, while others tend to operate independently and are responsible for obtaining their own funding to fund their activities. So what kind of food policy council is the Pima County Food Alliance? PCFA was actually started in 2011 by staff from the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona and the University of Arizona's College of Public Health. PCFA has always operated independently of a government body, which gives us more flexibility to respond to the community's needs, although it does also mean that we have less funding typically and have to go after grants and other sources of funding ourselves. Historically, PCFA has been run by a leadership council that consists of community members and people who work throughout Pima County's food system. Historically, we've had farmers market managers, agency staff, community organizers, and a lot of students and researchers from the university be part of our food policy council. And while membership and participation has varied over the years, at its most active point, PCFA had several active subcommittees and around 20 to 30 people attending monthly meetings. So to give you a better understanding of the work that PCFA has done in our community and the role that a food policy council might play in its community, I want to share some examples of past projects that PCFA has undertaken. Before 2014, it was illegal for school cafeterias to serve food grown in the school garden. So that meant that students and their teachers were doing a lot of work around food education, and kids weren't actually getting to taste, kind of the labors of their hard work. PCFA worked with the state health department to create reasonable guidelines for school garden food to be served in the cafeteria, and now that's possible. As well, we can also have composting as part of school gardens, and that's all thanks to the work that PCFA did in collaboration with the health department. Additionally, for as long as it's existed, PCFA has done a lot of education in the community. So we've hosted community events to provide food systems outreach and education, such as food-related movie screenings at Las Milpitas Community Farm. We've hosted panels with people who work throughout the food system to talk about topics related to food system worker rights and farming. And we've also done a lot of tabling at farmers markets and community events to provide information and advocate for policy change. In 2015, PCFA worked with the city of Tucson to amend zoning codes so that Tucson residents can practice urban agriculture. Now, as a result of those efforts, Tucson residents can raise chickens in their backyards, as well as other animals such as goats, grow produce, and even sell the produce that they grow more easily and to create revenue streams for their families. PCFA has recently been working with community stakeholders to advocate for a lower water rate for small farmers that are growing within Tucson Water's service rate. And we'll get into that specific policy in a little bit as it relates more to water justice. And this would lessen the barriers to growing fresh local food to feed the community and help to create a more resilient local food system here. Lastly, since 2018, PCFA has collaborated with the Arizona Food Systems Network, which is a coalition of food policy councils across the state of Arizona, to amplify local needs that we're seeing here and bring them to a statewide level. While PCFA has had a long history in the community, the COVID-19 pandemic had a great impact on the organization. So as a result of added stress to the food system and its workers, the Leadership Council's membership was reduced by about 75%, and the organization's capacity to continue doing its work was greatly reduced. A lot of our members at the time that the pandemic started were working at local food hubs or in our emergency food system, and were really called away by their work to do that and didn't have a lot of extra time to dedicate to the Food Policy Council, especially because it was a volunteer activity. So this, combined with pandemic safety regulations, prevented PCFA from continuing to do outreach and education in the way that it had historically, and further limited its ability to network. At the same time, the pandemic really exacerbated food systems issues and needs in the community, as many of us saw, and eliminated many of the injustices in our society and in our food system. It was at this point in time that PCFA really decided to take a step back and understand the community's shifting needs and figure out how to reorganize it in a way that really authentically represented Pima County and the needs of the people across it. So in 2021, the Pima County Food Alliance initiated a collaboration with the Food Systems Research Lab at the University of Arizona. And the two groups began working together to facilitate focus groups and revitalize the Pima County Food Alliance. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, we really couldn't have done this project without the many other brilliant people on our team. The faces that you see on this slide represent the collective Pima County Food Alliance and Food Systems Research Lab team over the last few years. And we're so grateful for all of their brilliance and help throughout the course of this project. And now I will hand it over to Gigi to tell you a little bit more about the Food Systems Research Lab.
I'll take a step back a little bit to look at our past work and then talk about some of the questions that we're still analyzing and working through with this current engagement work, and how it all connects with the PCFA's efforts. So back in spring and summer of 2020, a big question on my mind was, what is the impact of the pandemic on people's food security, their food supplies, and people who work in food businesses and food industries? And for me, food came up as an issue because I've been a part of our local food system in various ways, obviously as a consumer, but also working in restaurants and doing being an amateur chef and caterer and volunteering at the food bank. So just kind of been very interested in the local dynamics of food and the role that it plays in our culture and our lives here in Tucson. But another reason was that it was just it was a very real, visceral, and like visual impact for me. There's empty grocery store shelves in spring 2020. This was happening across the nation. But I think it really kind of jolted a lot of people especially in urban areas where grocery stores are seen as a reliable source of food. Also, there were businesses shutting down, layoffs were happening, food was scarce, and stuff was just shifting very, very quickly. And as it happened, a graduate student in the School of Geography, who is now Dr. Eden Kincaid, had similar questions about what was happening with our food supply. So Eden and I teamed up to investigate some of those issues, and then began collaborating with Laurel Volante, who's Assistant Director of the Center for Regional Food Studies at the University of Arizona. And then we were joined by Sean McCabe through the Coverdell Fellowship Program. And we did what amounted to a rapid qualitative assessment of issues in our food system during August 2020 through May 21. And this was both related to, but as we dove into it, it really extended beyond the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of our goals in conducting this research was to look at the types of changes and adaptations that people were making in the midst of a crisis, so we could kind of look and learn from those lessons in planning for a more robust food system that could adapt to forthcoming economic, societal, environmental, or political risks and those impacts. So to do that, we sent out an online survey to food producers who sold some portion of their product direct to consumers in Pima County. We also interviewed restaurants that source locally grown food. We talked with distributors of local foods like markets, community-supported agriculture programs, and mutual aid programs. And then we talked with organizations that support the local food system through advocacy, policy, capacity building, or providing food access. And it was through that work that we first connected with Shelby and the PCFA. And thanks, Laurel. The report, Laurel just put the report in the chat if you want to see it. But some of our findings from that process were that local food systems really play a crucial role during times of crisis. People in Southern Arizona quickly adjusted their operations to accommodate all of these shifting conditions, to meet local food needs, and in many cases were able to do that faster and be more nimble than the national supply chain could, especially in those early days of the pandemic-related shutdowns. So, when people were seeing these empty store shelves, a lot of them turned to local sources to fill in these gaps that were caused by ripple effects in the conventional food system supply chain. We found that the local food system demonstrated characteristics of resilience during this time: flexibility, pre-established networks, sharing resources, open communication channels were vital to developing an effective local response. And really, that response was possible because of the relationships and the trust and the local expertise that helped people adapt to these kind of shifting forms of risk. But, a big thing that came out too is these adjustments cost people time, they cost labor, they cost money, all during a time when people were stretched thin, a lot of different competing demands, and just a lot of instability. And, as Shelby mentioned, the pandemic exacerbated a lot of existing inequities in the food system. So issues around food insecurity, issues about who is able to participate in the food system, who can afford local food, who has the capital to invest in farming or to invest in building a local food business, and who has the power or the money to make or influence decisions about our local food system. So, inequities, just to kind of push on this a little further, inequities around food insecurity became more starkly apparent during the pandemic. So this shows from March 2020 to August 2020, the percentage of food insecure households increased from 25 to 32%. But that increase was unevenly distributed across racial groups, with higher proportions of new and persistent food insecurity reported in non-white households during that time period. So, just all of this is kind of converging around some questions around how do we learn from these past few years to design better responses, better systems, and better ways to adapt to converging climate change, economic impact, and public health crises, and do that in ways that center equity and can help us prepare for the future, while also changing and addressing long-standing injustices in our social and environmental systems. So yeah, that's a lot. So what we're really doing is kind of exploring the idea that local systems offer a resilient response to crisis. In doing so, we're also trying to kind of complicate these concepts of resilience and crisis by asking, for whom are these a crisis for? Who is resilience for? Looking at patterns of who benefits from resilience planning and who experiences crises more deeply. Kind of looking at acute and chronic framings of crisis and disaster. I think it's easier to think of a crisis as an event, in an acute time frame. But when we think about food insecurity and issues plaguing food system workers, if we think about those as kind of chronic crises, how can that change our application of resilience and thinking about these kind of like long-term, deeply embedded situations also as a crisis or disaster. So along those lines, one framing that we've been exploring within our lab are frameworks around resilience and disaster justice. So this definition comes from the Praxis Project, Living Hope Wheelchair Association, and Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, as, quote, disaster justice blends the ongoing struggles for environmental, climate, ecological, language, and social justice with demands for the improvement of disaster preparedness and response mechanisms. It is centered on acknowledging the expertise arising from the experiences of directly affected communities, with an emphasis in the transformation of institutions and policies that can cause marginalization and inequity. So one way that we're currently exploring these questions is by understanding forms of compounding risk in our local food system and how it affects people on the ground who work and consume and gather within our food system, and then kind of use that research to support paths forward and address the challenges we face. So I'm just going to go through a few of these kind of compounding risks briefly. So during our rapid assessment back in 2020 and 21, we made this kind of year-long timeline that called out some of the events that shaped local food system responses during the pandemic. There were numerous executive orders and declarations and mandates from federal, state, and county and local city governments around stay-at-home orders and wearing masks and distancing requirements. And all of those had pretty severe daily impact on daily operations of local food operations. For businesses and restaurants, as well as for people who needed to access food and buy food. And so this timeline obviously ends at 2021. And since then, more time has passed, and it's given us kind of a bigger understanding of how these risks and impacts have played out over time. So starting with some of the pandemic numbers, this graph shows new reported cases by day for Pima County from March 2020 through 2023, with the arrows pointing to the two times that Arizona had the highest number of cases in the world, summer 2020 and January 21. Obviously, the pandemic had a lot of economic impact. So when everything shut down in March 2020, we saw a huge spike in unemployment rates. So these lines show orange for Arizona unemployment and blue for Tucson. They're pretty much the same. They kind of jumped from around, 4 to 5% up to above 12, to like between 12 and 13% in a series of 2 months. So then we saw increases in the number of people receiving SNAP benefits for food assistance. So these charts show the number of individuals in Pima County who received SNAP benefits in the month of July over the past 4 years. So about more than 19,000 person per month increase between July 2019 and July 2020. And we also see an increase in the amounts of benefit distribution over the past 4 years. So the amount distributed in Pima County in July 21 was more than double the amount distributed in July 2019. And while people were receiving SNAP benefits for food purchases, we also experienced huge inflation in food prices. So this graph shows the consumer price index, which is a measure of economy-wide inflation. So the red line shows food at home, so food purchased from grocery stores or markets. The yellow shows food away from home, so basically from restaurants, and then blue is for all goods and items. You really see that food at home inflation spiked in spring 2020, kind of went down a little bit, and then has had a huge spike in 2022. And although this graph shows that inflation rates have decreased in the last, in 2023, we're still feeling the effects of that inflation, and prices of food remain at an all-time high. So these two charts show a drastic increase in the average amount of money people are spending on food each month in urban cities, and this is averaged across the US. But I'm sure we've all noticed how much more food is lately, and that is holding steady. Then we look at some climate and weather. In the midst of all these economic and health impacts, we experienced a lot of extreme weather and climate impacts over the past few years. So this graph shows the NOAA National Weather Service heat risk days for Tucson. And the heat risk framing is a prototype tool for heat that identifies unusual heat. So it's defined as the warmest 5% of temperatures for a particular date and location. Yellow shows minor risk, orange is moderate, red is major, and the purple is extreme. So, we can see here that more than 2/3 of our days each year are basically spent in some kind of risk to heat-related impacts. So it's not rare that we experience heat here in the desert. But if we take out some of those minor risks, those yellow days, and just look at moderate, major, and extreme risk, we see a really large spike in high-risk days in 2020. And 2020 was the second warmest year on record for Tucson. And so these show days that are extreme for us here in Tucson and have significant impacts for people who work or live outdoors, don't have access to their own vehicles, live far from public transportation, or have to walk between transportation stops and their destinations. Also, we had a lot of drought. We had a little bit of a respite from long-term drought for most of 2019 and the first half of 2020. Tucson then had its driest monsoon season in the summer of 2020, as well as that record heat, leading to an extended period of drought across Pima County. So if we zoom in a little bit on that time period, we can see we had over 9 months of exceptional drought across 60% of Pima County and extreme drought across almost 80% of the county. So just to tie this back to this concept of disaster justice and looking at our food system, we really have to take a broad look at the confluence of all of these risks and how they differentially impact various populations in Tucson and Pima County, and then how systems, policies, and practices can shift to reduce impact of these risks. So as we'll dive into a little bit more now, our partnership with the Pima County Food Alliance has really allowed our lab to ground our work in community needs and to support the ongoing efforts of people here in our food system. And for us too, as researchers, to really learn about how research is one of the tools that can help support the work to make bigger systemic changes. And just before I pass it back to Shelby, I just wanted to pause for any questions so far. I know we're talking a lot, but yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to come off mute. Not hearing anything. So, Shelby, over to you.
All right, hi again. So yeah, we are going to start talking about our project together in just a moment, but I want to give a little bit of context about what was happening in food systems work at the same time. So Gigi just gave an overview of the public health, climate, economic disasters that were happening from around 2020 to 2022, and honestly, even until now. And at the same time, conversations around COVID-19's impact on the food system were happening across the state. I mentioned earlier the Arizona Food Systems Network, and AZFSN was really leading the charge when it came to research around this topic in the state, and was able to provide some funding to local food system coalitions to do community engagement around this issue in their region. We were really lucky that Gigi identified this funding opportunity from AZFSN and approached me and the Pima County Food Alliance about a collaboration with PCFA and the Food Systems Research Lab. And PCFA at that time had been on pause for about a year. So thanks to the Arizona Food Systems Network, PCFA, and the Food Systems Research Lab, really began their relationship together and began collaborating, eventually forming a more official partnership and leading to the project that we're working on today. So just to give a very brief overview of the Arizona Food Systems Network, or AZFSN, as we often abbreviate it. AZFSN is Arizona's statewide food policy council. So you can really think of it as a larger version of the Pima County Food Alliance. It is a coalition of coalitions, practitioners, and food systems advocates that are working across the state. So yeah, it is, and while it is convened by Pinnacle Prevention, it is really comprised of these local, state, and regional advocates from across Arizona. So the overall purpose of AZFSN is to offer opportunities for all of its members to network and work together as one unified statewide coalition. It does this in many ways, including in-person gatherings and recurring virtual meetings. These spaces create opportunities for us to deepen connections, knowledge, and expertise so that we can build capacity and mobilize action around important policies, issues, funding opportunities, and other things that shape our food system. The map on the screen shows where all of AZFSN members live and work. So you can see that there's pretty broad representation from different advocates across the state. We're in 13 out of the 15 counties in Arizona. So with the first round of funding that the Food Systems Research Lab and PCFA received in 2021, we conducted 3 focus groups with a total of 14 individuals working in the food system. Participants included representatives from 11 small businesses and 2 education organizations. One of the conversations focused on farm to institution pathways. The second focused on food distribution, and the third focused on food access and security. These focus groups asked about how the pandemic impacted business and organizational operations and planning, as well as about the lessons that had been learned, challenges, opportunities, and needs around the COVID-19's impact on the food system. So the Arizona Food Systems Network analyzed this research, as well as the research that came from several other food system coalitions across the state, and compiled it into the report that you see on the screen called COVID-19 and the Arizona Food System, which you can find on azfsn.org. Some of the information that was gathered during this time was also used to inform Arizona's first statewide food action plan, which was published in 2022. This is a 3-year plan that provides specific objectives and strategies for action across 4 priority areas. And it can be used by individuals and organizations working in the food system food system to guide decision-making, inform policy decisions, decide how to allocate time and resources, leverage funding, and build statewide connections. So there are 4 main priority areas that are listed in the statewide food action plan, which are food access and distribution, land and water access and protection, climate smart foodways, and agriculture workforce development. As well, Indigenous food sovereignty emerged as a top priority during the planning process for this plan. And the goal of that working group is primarily to support Indigenous-led food sovereignty efforts through technical assistance, policy, funding, and other means. So that brings us to the project that we are here to talk about today. The research project that AZFSN was leading provided PCFA and the Food Systems Research Lab with some funding and information to really start thinking about what a thriving food policy council would look like for Pima County and how it could really authentically respond to the needs that were emerging from our initial conversations from people across the food system. In 2021, the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona had a larger than usual budget thanks to CARES Act funding from the federal government, as well as a plethora of donations related to the pandemic. This meant that they were able to fund more projects through their annual Thriving Communities grant. And I want to touch on a few key features of this particular grant that made it especially compatible for our project and many other projects throughout the community. So number 1, this funding is flexible, meaning there aren't many stipulations on what it can or cannot be used for. The grants team at the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona is also truly wonderful and accommodating to work with, and we're very gracious as our plans changed several times throughout the grant. And I really believe that it helped us to respond to what we were seeing in the community and allowed us to take our time because systems change takes time. And oftentimes the timeline of a grant doesn't always line up with reality. Second, the grant primarily funds projects that are systems change driven, and our partners at the Community Food Bank recognize that the impact of a functional food policy council could really have a large impact on the Pima County food system. And third, the reporting requirements for this grant are not onerous and have really allowed us to focus on actually implementing our project. And that's not to say we haven't been doing evaluation or reporting or all of the very important things related to a research project, but it's allowed us to do that for our community and not for our funder. So when this grant came out, I approached Gigi and our colleague, Dr. Laurel Belante from the Center of Regional Food Studies, and asked them if they would collaborate with the Pima County Food Alliance to apply for a Thriving Communities grant with the purpose to revitalize the Pima County Food Alliance. And from my memory, there was no hesitation. They enthusiastically agreed, and we collaboratively wrote that grant proposal together at the end of 2022 and received our award in the spring of, we wrote the grant at the end of 2021 and received the grant in the spring of 2022. So we had several primary goals for our grant project. First and foremost, we wanted to restructure and revitalize the Pima County Food Alliance. It was really important for us to understand how we could restructure the Food Policy Council in a way that not only worked for its members, but also for the larger community. Part of this included recruiting and rebuilding PCFA's membership, because without members, there is really no Food Policy Council. As well, PCFA's membership didn't always reflect the diverse community and food system that exists in Pima County. Oftentimes, it consisted of members who could count their participation in PCFA as part of their day job and who didn't have additional barriers to participation, such as childcare and transportation. And we really wanted to look at how we could make being a part of this Food Policy Council more accessible for more people. In an effort to help ease these particular barriers, we wanted most of the funding from this grant to pay people to do this work. especially those people who weren't already being paid by their job to participate. So a good portion of the funding we received was used to pay people working on this project, as well as people who participated in interviews and focus groups and other forms of community engagement. An important component of rebuilding PCFA for us was also surveying the food system and identifying existing and emerging food policy needs in Pima County. It's important for PCFA's work to reflect the needs of the community, and the only real way to do that is to ask people what they need. So we spent a lot of time doing focus groups, getting out to different community spaces and asking people what they needed in their food system. As well, this also seemed like a really good time to understand how the priorities outlined in that aforementioned Arizona statewide food action plan aligned with different priorities in Pima County. So we plan to assess that over the course of this project.
So this gone through a lot so far. So this is kind of has a little recap of our research lab and PCFA timeline, starting from 2020. That early work, collaborating on the Arizona Food Systems Network Plan, doing focus groups, getting the Thriving Communities Grant, and then bringing us into spring and summer, where we held a lot of visioning sessions to kind of plan and inform our work. So during that time, some lab members were doing background research on state policies about food and how that impacted us here in Pima County, and looked at the successes and failures of other food policy councils around the country, so that we could kind of use that to help kind of think through how PCFA could restructure itself. Fall 22 and winter of this year, 23, we were developing our community engagement strategy, collecting input from community members, food producers, and local food businesses, and how we wanted to do that, which we're going to go into now. And then originally we were going to be done in spring 23, which didn't happen. So we just crossed that out, and now it's fall 23. Where we are currently finalizing our analysis of findings from all of the community engagement that we've been doing over the past few months. And then we're also planning a really fun kickoff event for PCFA on December 2nd, which we'll talk about here in a minute.
Thanks for that recap, Gigi. So I want to talk a little bit about how we work together to co-produce this project, and kind of how the community and research sides of this project came together to make it happen. So every step and aspect of our project was co-produced. It took more time, admittedly, and more energy to work this way, but really it led to a project that felt truly collaborative and very dynamic. So first and foremost, PCFA and the Food Systems Research Lab had shared decision-making power. This was really crucial throughout the entirety of the project, and especially at the beginning, as we were hiring part-time team members, developing the focus groups, and deciding how to pivot from our original plan. It made it so that everybody was on board with what we were doing, and really just helped us work together a lot more nicely. A lot of the process happened over the course of many Zoom meetings between our two groups. So PCFA was able to provide context, history, and connections to the food system, while the Food Systems Research Lab was able to contribute a wealth of information and technical assistance regarding research methods and processes. And for the majority of our project, we met twice a week. So on Mondays, we would have what we considered our working meetings, where we would do things such as review job descriptions, workshop focus group questions, and do really a lot of that in the weeds work. And primarily it was Gigi and myself who always attended these meetings, but they were always open to other members of the team to pop in and out as they pleased. And I would say that having that open door policy really made it feel like we weren't gatekeeping and we're including everybody in the process. And then our Wednesday meetings typically included our whole team and were used kind of as higher level planning meetings. So we use this time to inform the whole team about things that were happening or changing in the project, to make big decisions about the project scope and activities, and plan for future needs. Deciding on the right communication tools for this project took time. We had a mixture of university staff and faculty, as well as non-university folks who all of a sudden needed to meet, exchange information, and share documents very frequently. And so ultimately having access to some of the university resources was immensely helpful for carrying out our project. So thanks to our partners working at the university, we were able to use Box to store sensitive information, use Zoom to meet virtually a few times a week. We used Teams to send quick messages and ask questions about project-related questions. And then, of course, we were able to reserve meeting rooms at the university for our in-person meetings and workshopping days. As a community-based organization without a lot of funding, this was really helpful for saving the Pima County Food Alliance money, time, and effort, and I think was a really great way to show how the university can support with the many different resources that it has on hand. And then lastly, another really important piece of our project was creating time outside of work for us all to get together and socialize. So from the beginning of our project, we scheduled social events where we could get together to learn about each other outside of the scope of our project and work. And we also included check-ins at the beginning of all of our meetings, just to leave space to share personal updates or anything that people wanted to share with the group. So ultimately, this is a community-based project, and we are all members of the community. So getting to know each other really helped our team to feel more connected and invested in the work that we were doing together. And most importantly, it made it really fun to work together. And I think one of the most common things that we've heard from people on our team is just that they really enjoy the time that they get to spend working on this project. And that feels really good because work is hard sometimes, and we all enjoy spaces where we feel accepted and get to bring our whole selves. So throughout the project, a few key principles have guided our work. These shared values made decision-making easier and kept us rooted in the goals of our project. The primary goal of our project was to create a food policy council that could develop equitable policies that support the community. So it was really important that the needs of the community be centered in every aspect of our work. Centering this principle made it clear that we needed to pay community members for their time, meet them where they were at, and consider their needs as we envisioned a thriving food policy council for Pima County. On the lab's end, these needs came up in focus groups and interviews. PCFA's standing connection to the wider food system really allowed the research to do something and be useful in the community. Another guiding principle has been justice and equity. This whole time we've operated with the belief that Pima County's Food Policy Council needs to meet the needs of those most impacted by food apartheid and climate change. And lastly, our team really embraced caring for ourselves and each other. So each of us have other work, projects, families, and life circumstances that have affected how we can show up on any given day. And I believe that we truly practiced saying and accepting no when work and life made it difficult to attend meetings or meet our self-imposed deadlines. And I think that our grace and flexibility for ourselves and each other really helped to create that caring and supportive environment.
Great. So yeah, we'll dive into a little bit more of the methods that we've been using in the past few months. So our plan was to convene a series of community conversations, or basically focus groups with, so this with farmers and food producers, businesses, nonprofits, and then other food related organizations. And the goal, I think the goal was really to introduce PCFA and the overall concept of a food policy council, and then understand from focus group participants how a thriving food policy council could support their work. As well, we were kind of using those priority areas from the Arizona statewide food action plan to ask, how do these priorities resonate with your work, and what actions do you already have underway that fit under these priorities, or what actions could you envision kind of fitting under these priorities, and here in Pima County. We also wanted to talk with past Pima County Food Alliance members about their reflections on the Food Policy Council, what went well, what didn't go well, if they had any suggestions for PCFA moving forward. And then we also wanted to join and support other organizations' community events where we could be a part of their work and then also interact with a larger group of people. And so I would say, in looking at this plan, it seems really simple. We ended up developing a pretty straightforward focus group facilitation script. And all those questions, if you look at them in and of themselves, are very simple, but I just want to emphasize that it took so long to develop that together, and also, give people time and space to practice leading focus groups, and coming up with something that would provide a space for fruitful discussion, be generative, be a valuable use of people's time and effort, and really help us move this work forward. Another piece of work that we went through together was a series of actor mapping sessions, and this was led by our partners Rachel Lay and Rachel Gildersleeve from the Community Research Evaluation and Development team, or CRED team, here on campus, to help us think through the connections that we already had, and then the sectors that we wanted to reach. So this helped us envision and plan our next steps of engagement together. And we looked at what are the big sectors we want to focus on. So we were looking at grassroots and justice organizations, agriculture, local distributors, public health, government, and then kind of piecing out who in each of these sectors we were connected to and where we wanted to grow our connections. And I will say the cool thing about actor mapping is that it's a living document. And so this kind of shows where we're at now after the last round of engagement that we've done. So it's the next iteration of the map with the purple additions. Those are the new ones that we've added over since we did this in February. But yeah, so it's a living document, so we can really see if and how we're growing our network of people in the way that we envisioned. We can see gaps of who is missing or the sectors that are missing as we go. We can adjust as needed. And then we can also shift the sectors and priorities as the needs change and as we're doing this work. So overall, the work we've done since March 23, we've conducted 16 focus groups with 82 individuals from all over the food system. And we conducted 18 interviews with PCFA members. And then we participated in 3 public events hosted by other organizations where we were able to interact about 20 to 50 people at each of those events. And we most of that was just like talking with people, but a lot of it was like dot surveys and graffiti walls and like post-it note mural things where people could kind of engage in various ways. And I think Shelby touched on this, so I won't go too much into it, but, really keeping open access among our team through all of these different technologies was really important. And that also took a lot of time to work out. So it was really important for us to share amongst our team, but also to share back with our partner, or with the people that we were engaging through these focus groups and through these interviews. Shelby, I know we'll talk a little bit more about that with some of the event stuff that we're coming up, but you know, in these conversations, we asked people what they wanted, and one of them was that they wanted to be connected with each other. So we've created a listserv so that people can kind of connect amongst each other in the larger network. We're going to be creating a double-sided one-pager of our findings that we can hand out to everyone. And then, yeah, we're going to do some in-person sharing back and co-analysis of the findings that we've had so far. And then I guess just another point about the focus groups themselves. We gave a lot of thought to creating these methods for engagement so that they would be a valuable use of people's time. And one of the reasons I like focus groups so much is that a well-facilitated focus group can be a very generative experience. People within an organization, or people that even know each other, don't often take the time to sit down and reflect with one another on where they're at. So of some of the feedback we got from our participants, people are talking about how useful the conversation was. And one group even asked for a transcript of the conversation because they came up with ideas for themselves that they could then use for their organization. So, just to say that these methods for engagement really matter.
I want to quickly touch on some of our key findings that emerged from our focus groups and interviews. So we really want to create a food policy council that is reflective of the needs of our community. And these were the main things that emerged from our conversations. I'm not going to read the quotes, but they are there just to add a little bit of context if you'd like to process those. So one of the main things that came up was the need to foster a relationship with the Pima County Health Department to discuss reasonable and mutually beneficial food safety and permit approval policies. Another key finding was that people want farmer and producer support. So they need help identifying opportunities to offer incentives to local farms and agriculture businesses, to provide training for beginning and aspiring farmers. This is sometimes known as an apprenticeship program, but really, more young people want to get into farming and the barriers are high. So we need ways to make that more accessible for people. We also it was also requested that PCFA helped identify opportunities to support new farm businesses by providing affordable access to land and infrastructure. So access to land and water is another key barrier to farming, and people are really looking for support around that. We also got quite a few requests for support around land use and development. So people suggested exploring land use and zoning policies to understand how empty lots can be transformed into farming and gardening spaces throughout Pima County, and then also help protecting arable land from being converted to development. Of course, there was also a lot of discussion around food waste and exploring policy opportunities to strengthen efforts toward diversion of food waste. For example, offering or expanding financial incentives to businesses to divert food waste. And then lastly, support around infrastructure. We know that middle of the process, infrastructure is a key thing missing from our local food system. And so people requested shared infrastructure to facilitate the distribution of consumption of local food, including refrigerated transportation and commercial kitchens. So at this point, we've interviewed 100 people across the food system. We have our key findings. We've done research on what makes for an effective and equitable food policy council. Now what? On December 2nd, we are hosting our first community-wide event to introduce the results of our findings to the community and get their buy-in on what we found. We'll be hosting this event at Las Milpitas Community Farm to share what we've learned with the community. We've invited everybody that we've interviewed over the course of this project, as well as community members. That includes yourselves. And so we'll drop a link to the RSVP in the chat in just a moment here. If you'd like to register, we would love to have you there. This event will be a mixture of us sharing out information, getting even more feedback on what we're presenting, networking, and really just taking time to celebrate the amazing work that everybody is doing across our food system and across our county. And of course, we'll also have food, music, and kids activities, and it will be a family-friendly event, so to make it a little bit more accessible for folks to come. At our community kickoff event and future meetings as well, we'll continue to share out information about PCFA and the research that we've done throughout the course of the project with our community. We'll also continue doing community engagement, especially through a really exciting and recently developed art activity that was developed in collaboration with Dr. Rachel Zollinger. This will help us to reach more community members and to understand their vision for the food system so that we can continue to take into consideration emerging needs as they come out. And then lastly, we are finally ready to bring on the next PCFA cohort. So in January, we'll be hosting a follow-up meeting for anybody who's interested in getting more involved with the Pima County Food Alliance so that we can help to shepherd in the next generation of leaders and really reinvigorate the Food Policy Council. And I just wanted to share some quick photos in preparation for the event. So on the left side of the screen there is part of our community engagement art activity that we'll be doing there, as well as in other spaces in the community over the next few weeks and months. And then on the right-hand side of the screen is Las Milpitas, where we will be hosting our event. So as most projects do, ours came with its own set of challenges, which we handled throughout the process of our time working together. And I just want to briefly go over a few of these. So fiscal sponsorship was the first challenge that we encountered when we were awarded our grant funding. We knew that the funding we received from the community food bank couldn't be routed through the university because they take such a large percentage of those funds for administrative fees. And so, unfortunately, almost immediately after our grant proposal was awarded, PCFA's longtime fiscal sponsor, which was a local church, told us that they could no longer serve in that capacity due to their own limited capacity in terms of admin. And because PCFA isn't a nonprofit organization or an LLC, we really needed to find a fiscal sponsor to be able to manage those grant funds. We had to speak with at least 5 churches and nonprofit organizations before we finally found our fiscal sponsor. And so it was just really a big effort in terms of finding somebody who could help us to manage that money. At the beginning of the project, we also set out to hire a part-time coordinator who could help PCFA with some of the administrative and outreach components of our project. At that point, admittedly, we didn't really know which tasks would be most important for our work. And so we kind of had this cumbersome long list of tasks that our person might do. And honestly, it was a little bit long, winding, and maybe overly comprehensive. So while we did hire somebody for this position initially, unfortunately, they only stayed in the role for a few months. And really, I believe that this was unsuccessful for a few reasons, some of which were the lack of a defined role and lack of structure. It was difficult to figure out who would supervise them and kind of what that line of command, for lack of a better term, would be. So without an official structure or supervisor, it was just difficult to manage. After going through that experience, we believe that we can remedy some of these issues when we hire a program coordinator in the future by better defining roles and responsibilities and also creating a more supportive structure in the Pima County Food Alliance. And then lastly, folks working across our food system are really burned out. It's probably not just the food system, but we really notice it here. So many of them have been working overtime since the start of the pandemic, probably even before that. And so we really needed to be conscious of what we requested from the people that we were working with and engaging around this project, and account for the demands and on time and resources as we thought about what a thriving food policy council could look like.
And I'll just touch on a couple of research challenges briefly. I know we're running a little short on time. We want to leave some time for questions. And I also want to hear about Shelby's success stories. But just to say, the IRB on this last bit of community engagement was really tricky. So we got approval for those first rounds of work, those the surveys and interviews and the initial focus groups we did in 2021. It was an exempt. It was considered exempt, but we still had to have consent forms and all of that. So when we went to amend it to add this community engagement piece in 2023, we had faced round after round of roadblocks that was going to inhibit this next phase of work. And basically the feedback from our human subjects office was, if you are going to do these community conversations before people even sign up for them, they're going to need to be given the long consent form to read, because during that sign up process, we would be collecting their names and contact information. And that was even in this project that was considered exempt from needing human subjects approval. And so, for us as researchers, we took a step back from, do we need this phase to be considered publishable research, which for that we would have had to go through that process, that whole IRB process for. And so we decided to pull it out of that and, still taking all the measures to be ethical in our practice, have the rigor of the research process, but basically all of our findings are going to PCFA and back to the community and won't live in a paper. So, that was an interesting process to go through. Also, just paying people for their knowledge and time using university accounts and compensating participants is also really tricky. People have to supply their names, addresses, personal information to the university, which a lot of people don't want to do for a number of reasons. And so some of the ways around that is you can use gift cards, but a lot of people want cash and they should get cash. And I think there's a lot of ethical considerations for a project like ours to be supporting big box stores like Amazon or Walmart instead of small local businesses. It's really antithetical to this work. So just kind of going into the weeds a little bit on that, because they're crucial components to doing this kind of work, and things that we didn't really consider would be issues. Successes.
All right, I will speed through these. We have had a lot of successes, and I think we've touched on a lot of them throughout the course of this conversation, but I just really want to give an overview of a very recent policy success as it's related to water and water justice here in Pima County. So we've been doing this project, and throughout the duration of this project, we have also been continuing our policy work, especially around a policy initiative that PCFA began working on in 2019. This proposed policy would create a new lower water rate for small-scale food-producing farmers within Tucson Water Service Area. As of this past Tuesday, 2 days ago, this policy was finally passed by Mayor and Council for a 1-year pilot program. And I just want to give an overview of why we chose this policy and what it means for our local food system. So why create a new lower water rate for small-scale farmers? Small-scale farmers on Tucson Water are paying a commercial water rate currently, which is over $12 per CCF. It's a lot of money. They pay more water than most golf courses on Tucson Water do, which is a little bit absurd to us. Farming at this scale is essentially a public service. So many of the farmers that we know are losing money by growing nourishing foods for the community, most of which is sold through markets that accept public food assistance benefits and is serving a low-income population in our community. We also know that investment in our local food system can lead to more resilience in the long term. As public health and climate catastrophes over the last few years have demonstrated, our global food system is precarious. Making sustainable farming more viable is crucial for success of a thriving local food system, and this water rate lessens the barrier to farm and hopefully increases the amount of local produce that is being grown here. Lastly, we know that water is a precious resource in the desert, and we need to be wise about how it's allocated. So this policy makes it clear that water justice and food justice is a priority of the city of Tucson, and that the value of using water to grow nourishing food is at least as valuable as using it to water golf courses, hopefully more. Time will tell. And I can't share the story without talking about Chris and Dawn Breckenfeld of Breckenfeld Family Growers. They primarily grow garlic, onions, tomatoes, and chiltepines beans and sell them at the Santa Cruz River Farmers Market. They're growing on about an acre of land just west of town. And while they are on Tucson water, they live just outside of the city limits, which makes their water rate particularly high. So over the last few years, their water bill has been thousands of dollars a month, even though they have many water conservation practices in place and use primarily drip irrigation. So this really causes the Breckenfelds to lose money on their effort to provide fresh produce to the community. And they were the first small-scale farmers to bring this issue to our attention, and we've worked closely with them ever since to advocate for this policy. And I just want to give a quick overview of the timeline of getting this water rate passed, because it happened over a 4-year process. All to say that it takes time to do this work. So in 2019, a member of Pima County Food Alliance, Eric Stanford, in collaboration with Allison Jody, published a white paper called Incentivizing Urban Agriculture in Tucson, which really outlined what a water rate for small farmers would look like. This white paper was supported by 11 local food system organizations and started to gain traction with the Pima County Food Alliance when Eric brought it to our attention. We spent most of the fall of 2019 finding support. So PCFA, in collaboration with the Community Food Bank, began having meetings with council members and Tucson water leadership. At this point, there was a little bit of interest, but not a lot of support between those two groups. And so collectively, we decided that PCFA, the Arizona Food Systems Network, Southern Arizona Young Farmers and Ranchers, and the Community Food Bank needed to apply for a Vitalist Systems Change grant to really work on getting this policy passed. We were selected as one of 11 finalists for the grant, and then COVID hit. And so at that point, Vitalist directed a lot of its funding to COVID-related projects, and PCFA pressed pause. Fast forwarding to the spring of 2020, we began restarting that conversation with our community partners and really found a champion at the Ward 3 office. I believe that this was key to really getting this policy through, because our staff member there was able to walk us through the process of bringing this to mayor and council and understanding the ins and outs of the politics there and how we could make it appealing to them, especially considering their climate resilience agenda. In the summer and fall of 2022, we spent a lot of time doing relationship building with all of the different ward offices, Tucson Water, the Community Water Advisory Council, as well as other community members and ward offices, and really just doing a lot of education around why this water policy was important. In winter of 2023, Gigi and Audra, one of our partners from the Community Food Bank, gave a presentation to the mayor and council at a study session. And then mayor and council asked Tucson Water to assess the impacts of this policy on their bottom line and also water usage. There were many other negotiations that happened between winter and where we're at now, but PCFA, Community Food Bank, and the Breckenfelds really spent a lot of this time working with Tucson Water to determine what the specific details of this policy would be, who would be eligible, what the exact rate would be, and how long the pilot period would last. And then PCFA, because of all of the work that we had done in our focus groups, was really able to mobilize a lot of the different food system organizations that we had been deepening relationships with over the last year. And so it was really cool to see them also submit letters of support on behalf of this policy and show that it had more support across the wider food system. I think that shows a lot about how a thriving food policy council can mobilize others in the community. And then, as I mentioned, on Tuesday, Mayor and Council did pass that program for a one-year pilot. And just a quick snapshot of Gigi and Audra giving their presentation to Mayor and Council in February of 2023. We were told to do a lot of education, so talk about why why farming is a public service, and why, even though these are quote unquote for-profit businesses, it is beneficial for them and the community at large to have a lower water rate for urban agriculture. Lastly, I just wanted to share the QR code for RSVP for our event on December 2nd. Would love to have you all there and meet you in person. Feel free to come by. There will be free food. Bring your families, and we would love to see you.
Fantastic. What a fantastic presentation. Thank you both so much. I think we can open it up for questions. If there's anybody, you can either put it in the chat or just unmute yourselves if folks have questions.
Yeah, I also want to echo, that was amazing. Thank you both so much. Also just like a really impressive like team and like very like thoughtful engagement that you both have been leading and working on, which is really cool to see. I think, yeah, we've seen kind of like different like scales of like researcher and collaborators talk before, and I feel like this is maybe like the largest one in scope that you just presented, and so it's really cool to see, you know, like over the years how that's come together and what that's looked like, and like how you're like influencing policy, which is really amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That was wonderful feedback.
And thanks for giving us the space to talk about it all. It is really the first time it's come together, and it's been a lot to kind of process and put into a story. So
yeah. Well, yeah, we're really glad to have you. I want to open up to any of the folks who are on the call for questions. Feel free to
yeah, I have a I'm sorry. I have a question. My name is Soleil. I'm a sustainable built environments major at the U of A. And recently in my classes, I've been learning a lot about food insecurity and kind of just from a college student's perspective. I live on campus, and we talked a lot about how it's hard to get healthy, affordable food as a student on campus. So I was just wondering like your opinions on that, and kind of, is there anything that like the organizations you talked about are doing kind of in that sense, like helping students or just people like who live in a community like on campus who don't have access to healthy, affordable food?
You want to take it, Gigi?
I mean, I guess just the first thing that came to mind is the campus pantry that University of Arizona runs. It's They actually do a lot of really good work to just provide food for anyone who has a CAT card to go in and take what they want or need. And they do a lot to take a lot of the food that is at a large university events and package it for people to take with them so that they can eat it on campus. So I mean, I think that program is really good. I think I don't know. I think a lot of the issues too really come down to transportation and kind of how do we move food through our system in a way that can get to people who aren't necessarily able to drive or get to a farmer's market at certain time periods. So I think that's a question that we're still kind of working through, is like, what are the various ways that we can look at food access and reduce some of those barriers to access through different kinds of like pantry points and other programs. I don't know, Shelby, do you have additional?
Yeah, that was a good point. And I think what I would say to that too is that historically the Pima County Food Alliance has lacked representation from youth and undergraduates at the university, and that would be a really great group to bring in. So just a plug if you're interested in getting involved and kind of bringing that perspective, or know somebody who might be, I think that would be really wonderful. And we can start to look at what those policies on and around campus might look like. And also, I think that we've seen a lot of success in recent years with college students being able to access SNAP benefits. Historically, they have not been able to do that, but it's been proven to really increase food security amongst college students. And so I think, bringing and elevating those experiences to the statewide and even the federal level could be a really great opportunity that we can work on and have access to through the larger Arizona Food Systems Network. And also I had heard a few, like maybe a year ago, that some of the markets like Highland Market on campus were starting to accept SNAP benefits. So I'm not sure if that ended up happening, and I know that they have a higher price point anyways, but could be another avenue to that.
It makes me wonder if there's ever been discussion or talks about having a farmer's market location more centrally located, like to like downtown or campus. I mean, I'm aware of like the one at sorry, I'm totally forgetting, the one on Thursdays and then like the one on like the weekends, but like if there's one that's, I don't know, maybe there is one that I'm just not aware of.
There was, I remember pre-pandemic, there was a market on campus. And I don't really remember like why it ended, because I think it ended before COVID. It wasn't like a COVID thing. But yeah, I think there was a lot of interest in that. And I might be something to look back into. I will say the Santa Cruz River Farmers Market is on the streetcar line. So if you are on campus, you could get there for free. But it's Thursdays from I think 4 to 7 p.m. or 3 to 6, depending on the weather, the season. And if you do have access to SNAP benefits, there's double up food bucks that basically double your purchasing power. Like per $1 of SNAP benefits, you get another $1 of purchasing power for locally grown fruits and vegetables. So most things at a farmer's market, you can use those double up food bucks for. So
Cool. Yeah, no, that's great information. I was wondering, I don't know if you have a link or like to the RSVP that you want to put in the chat, and then maybe we can also share it out with just everybody who registers. I know some people had to hop off earlier, but yeah, that sounds like an awesome event. And so we'd love to get it out to as many students and folks as possible.
Yeah, I think I think it would be a nice way to see some of this in action. Since we're kind of thinking about having like a data gallery of findings that'll be like posted up on a wall that people can kind of, make comments on and respond to, or, kind of if they want to be part of this next PCFA cohort, that they can like, put their contact information up there. And I know Shelby talked about an community art project that will be happening there. And yeah, so I think it should be a fun time. I think, yeah, Shelby just dropped the link in the chat. So
Great, thanks. Yeah, no, we'll share that out with people. So we are at the top of 1/2 past. So I just want to thank both Shelby and Gigi again so much for your time preparing this and putting this together and sharing with us all. Yeah, so just as a reminder to the other folks on the call, we do have some other webinars coming down the pipeline for the spring semester. So I think we're going to just use the registration links or lists that we had from the past 2 webinars to share flyers and information of how to register for those upcoming webinars in the spring. And Lucas, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Just echo what you said. Really fantastic presentation. Thank you both so much for your time, and excited to continue the webinar in the spring.
Great. Okay, well, thanks everybody.
Thank you so much. And yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any